What is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today. We are recording this right after that feisty Oklahoma City Thunder versus Detroit Pistons matchup. Of course, am your host, Sean Murphy, alongside one of my favorite guests, someone who's becoming a regular on the podcast, my guy, Leggy Sports. Leggy, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Nothing much, man. Good Pistons basketball. Didn't see a lot of Cade, but they were still competing through it. It's an honor to be here as well, so I appreciate it.
Hey, man, always love whenever you come on. Always have a good time talking hoops with you. And yeah, man, this was a very interesting week or so, I'd say, in Pistons basketball. A lot of ups, a lot of downs. I think a lot of, what the Pistons need to work on before the postseason has definitely revealed itself. But also, we've seen some fire and feist from this group in particular. Right before we recorded this, JB Bickerstaff just had one of his most impassioned press conferences, perhaps of his career, but definitely as the coach of the Pistons. So before we get into the podcast and all of that, I would be remiss if we didn't watch this press conference. This clip is courtesy of another friend of the show, someone who was actually on the show last week, our guy Eric Vincent. So shout out to Eric, the beat writer for Clutch Points for the Pistons. So without further ado, let me show you this clip of JB Bickerstaff just absolutely going in on the officiating in this Pistons loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder.
I'm disgusted by the way that game was officiated. The level of disrespect was above and beyond. They have a guy fall down and trip on his own teammate's foot. They review us for a hostile act. They throw an elbow to our chest, neck area. I asked for him, at least take a look at it, right? Just show us the respect to take a look at it, okay? No one would take a look at it. Okay? The disrespect has gone far enough, and I'm not going to allow our guys to be treated the way that they were treated tonight. Okay? I tried to have a conversation with official. The official was arguing with Mark. I say his name one time, and he screams at me and tells me that's enough. Right? We understand that we play a style of ball that's physical. It's on the edge. Right? I coach my ass off with a passionate way. I'm into the games. Our players are into the games. We understand that. Right? But we deserve a level of respect because we're competing our tails off and bringing something positive to this league. Right? We're growing young players. Our young players are competing their tail off. The least that they could do is get the same respect that everybody else in this league gets and get refereed the same way that everybody else in this league gets. And enough is enough of it. And what you saw tonight was disgusting. It was a disgusting display of disrespect towards our guys and what we're trying to do.
All right. So obviously a fired up JB Bickerstaff, very impassioned and upset on behalf of his group. As someone who's been able to sit in on quite a few JB Bickerstaff press conferences this year, I can tell you that the demeanor that you see during the game is fired up. Energy as a coach during the game is not normally what you see in a press conference. Normally he's very composed, very calculated, very matter of fact in which the way that he speaks. He was passionate and fired up tonight. And, I think to a certain extent, Leggy, he has every right to feel that way. And, at the very least, it's when a coach steps up for their guys, it's because he has a feeling and he has a hunch that it's time. I gotta step up and step in for my guys. So obviously, I think he's going to be getting a call from the NBA offices tomorrow morning with an with a formal notice of a fine coming. But Leggy, from your perspective, just what are your immediate takeaways, not only just from that press conference, but just from the game as a whole?
Yeah, it did feel like the Pistons weren't getting the benefit of the call throughout a majority of the game. And you're talking about against a Thunder team that every single night seems to get a majority of the refs' favor. I mean, if you're talking about the press conference, JB, it's just awesome to hear goosebumps a little bit. I mean, that's a stark difference from last year when we're talking about Monty Williams. I mean, he had one press conference where everyone was like, oh, this guy's into it. He's torching the refs right now. But how does that compare to JB? I mean, JB's was quivering. His voice was quivering a little bit. You could tell he was furious. He was pounding the table, scrunching up the paper.
Yep.
I mean, overall, it's great to see, and I'm curious how that will affect the rest of the season. There's not many games left. Is that going to help Detroit with the refs? Is it going to maybe take away? Is it going to make it so the refs are kind of a little bit more lenient, or is it going to make it so they're a little bit more aggressive with their foul calling on Detroit? That's to be seen. But I mean, overall, great game from Detroit. You didn't see a lot of Cade, but they were able to have some fire to come back. Obviously, didn't work out, but yeah, I think that JB conference was much needed for this team because I think that's going to be another spark for the rest of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, I think, as much as we're going to talk about the officiating and, just some of the ways that it did affect this game, I think one thing just has to be said right off the top. The Oklahoma City Thunder are the best team in the NBA. Like I tweeted out earlier, just give them the Larry O'Brien. And I'm not trying to be overreact, like to overreact. I've watched this team quite a bit this season. When you just look at the depth that they have, the talent that they have, they played at this level and they didn't even have their second through fourth leading scorers out there on the court. That's how much depth this team has. Like you and I were talking before, and we were just like, man, Case and Wallace is really good. And I brought up the point of Case and Wallace on most teams, he would probably be your second or third centerpiece in a young core, rebuild. In Oklahoma City, he's a footnote just because they're so deep.
Yeah. I mean, you look at some of the other young cores in the NBA and they don't have a Case and Wallace. And the things he was able to do throughout the start of the game, and when you have a Shea, you don't have to rely on him every single night. And you would expect, oh, Jalen Williams is that guy. Well, he didn't play. Oh, well, if they're not having it, then Chet Holmgren, he's the guy. He's not having it. He's out tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, Case and Wallace stepped up in a big way. Huge performance from him.
Yeah, and it's not like Shea had an off night either. Like I knew he scored a lot. I didn't realize he had 48 in this one. This almost certainly feels like the game that if you're a voter for MVP, I think this is going to be the one that sticks in their minds and goes, okay, it's probably Shea's award. So, just that, like he's playing at a high level of basketball, but like you said, like when we talk about the benefit of the call, the benefit of getting to the line, there are a lot of times where Shea was either, baiting for calls or initiating contact that led to fouls that was getting him to the free throw line. He had almost as many free throw attempts as the entire Pistons team. He had 10. The Pistons had 12. The Thunder or the Pistons had 13, excuse me. The Thunder as a team had 22. So, just kind of talking about, the free throw disparity is definitely there. Now, granted, I do think some of it comes from, the Pistons not necessarily putting themselves in the best situations at times. I do think, like obviously it's understandable. Cade's, fired up. It's kind of out of character for him. Not something we see very often in these types of matchups. It's very difficult for someone like him, to be ejected and for this team to still have a chance. But, credit to the veterans that the Pistons have brought in to keep them in this one. And I think if there was any game to showcase, this is why they went and got Dennis Schroeder, and this is the value that he brings. This was the game. I mean, he had 17 points, 11 assists, no turnovers. He was dialed in on both sides of the court. And to do that against the best defensive team in basketball, like I know the Pistons have had the number one defensive rating over the last month or so. The Thunder have had the number one defensive rating from the beginning of the season on, and he played that well.
Yeah, the bench unit, absolutely elite. And when Cade went out, you didn't see Asar Thompson, Tim Hardaway, even Tobias Harris step up and kind of help them get back into it. You saw Isaiah Stewart, Malik Beasley. Fontecchio didn't play a lot, plus 15, though, in his 12 minutes. Only 4 points. But, I mean, a lot of people were really quick to write him out of town already. But so really good to see kind of an all-around performance for him, at least helping out, even if he's not scoring.
And people forget, this is his third team this season. And it's not because he's a bad player. In Brooklyn, they were winning too much for what they were trying to do. In Golden State, they had an opportunity to get Jimmy Butler. So that's why he bounces around as much as he does, is because this is just a weird league.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't have a stable environment as well coming in here. Like, yes, you're going to Golden State, but obviously you saw it didn't work because he in Brooklyn was playing with the ball in his hands, creating. You saw with Golden State, he had to play alongside Steph, and it didn't really work.
No.
His stats went down considerably, and we're now in Detroit. I haven't actually looked at how the stats stack up, but his impact is tremendous. It's almost like he's doing what he was supposed to do in Golden State, but in Detroit.
Yeah, for sure. I think the big thing that really didn't work in Golden State, I think the big difference here in Detroit is the ability to play pick and roll and have that capable partner. Like when he's out on the court, he either has essentially he has Jalen Duren or Isaiah Stewart, who, I know we talk a lot about Stu as a defender, which, by the way, best defensive big arguably in basketball right now with
Yeah.
some of the stuff that he was doing. He had 3 blocks tonight against the Thunder. The only 3 blocks the Pistons had all night, by the way,
Wow.
were by Isaiah Stewart. He is an underrated pick and roll big as well. He's good at getting to the rim and he plays with discipline. Doesn't shoot many threes, but whenever he makes one, it seems like it's a big one. So just, yeah, I think he's been a phenomenal addition to, this bench unit, and, still really like what we're seeing from Ron Holland as well as the season has gone on. But overall, Leggy, if I'm to, give a reason as to why we're seeing the Pistons struggle a little bit more of late, I think it's because the word is out on the Pistons in the sense of people know that this team is good, and they're no longer being seen as a night off team. I know the Thunder sat players tonight, but that's because they're almost 12 games ahead in the West standings with 16 games to go. So
it's crazy.
they have home court in the playoffs. They don't need to play players every night. They're set, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, like some of these other matchups, they're limiting, and OKC did this tonight as well. They're limiting the Pistons' opportunities to run. They're limiting the Pistons' opportunities to, turn the ball over because they have elite offensive players who are systematically picking them apart, right?
Yeah.
When the game slows down, it swings in the other team's favor.
100%. And you're talking about the team's kind of figuring out what Detroit's doing. I mean, they're expecting this night in, night out from the Detroit team. You're looking at the rest of the regular season, and they don't have a tough go here. I mean, they have a gauntlet of the rest of the regular season. I don't know what it is after tonight, but before tonight's game, they had the 3rd strongest schedule according to Tankathon.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, don't expect it to get any easier. Don't expect it to get easier. And I mean, hopefully we hold on to that 6th seed. It looks like we're probably going to, but you definitely don't want to suck the rest of the way,
right?
Get into the 6th seed and then have a matchup against the 3 seed.
So I can tell you exactly what the rest of their schedule's like, Leggy. I have it right up here. So they play at New Orleans, who their record's deceiving. Zion's back, and they've been playing a lot better of late. Trey Murphy, I'm not sure how much you've seen of him, but he's starting to get the ball in his hands and creating more himself individually. He can pull up from the parking lot. I think he's going to be awesome.
And that's why they got rid of Ingram. At least from my point.
Yeah, exactly. That's why they wouldn't pay him, because we have Evan we have Brandon Ingram at home, man. So they play at New Orleans, at Miami. They've lost 6 in a row, so they're going to be motivated to get a win. But at the same time, on national TV, Heat's struggling. Their season's going in the tanker. That could be a win. Dallas, will they even have a roster to field out there against the Pistons? There's legit. Bobby Marks of ESPN just talked about there's a legit chance that they might have to talk about forfeiting games down the stretch here because of how bad things have gotten.
Sorry, that hasn't happened since the 60s.
Mm-hmm. And they literally can't sign more players, Leggy. Their two-way players are almost at their max amount that they can play in a season. They have so many players injured, and because they're, in the apron, they don't have the ability to add any extra players. They're stuck.
I was confused about how they were going to forfeit because I didn't know that part. I was just thinking, okay, teams sign players all the time. What happened in COVID? Was there some different exception that was allowed that teams were allowed to sign?
Yeah.
I mean, Greg Monroe was back in the league.
Yeah. So essentially there were kind of these exceptions and certain things that were set in place by the league because it was so unprecedented, the amount of players. Like literally at one point during COVID, they had almost 50% of the entire players out due to COVID. So when you had Hamidou Diallo have almost 40 points and he was the focal point of the offense, which by the way, shout out Hamidou Diallo. I don't know why people were giving him on Twitter this week. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Anyway,
rest of the Pistons schedule. After Dallas, they play New Orleans. They play at home versus New Orleans, at home versus San Antonio, and After that, it's Cleveland, Minnesota, OKC, Toronto, Memphis, Sacramento, New York, Milwaukee. So you can make the legitimate argument, Leggy, that after the Spurs game on March 25th, every other opponent has something that they're playing for, has legitimate reasons why they want to get a win as well. Like Toronto's not really tanking. Like they're kind of pushing for the play-in. So like they are like if they like take their foot off the gas, so to speak. I'm not saying they're going to be in danger to be in the play-in because like they still have that kind of that 5-game cushion as the season goes on, but like this could be a bumpy stretch if they if they are not getting in transition and still not seeing results in the half court, which if you want to talk about and make the argument of where do you miss Jaden Ivey the most, I think it's in the half court because it puts so much more pressure on Cade and those around him to initiate offense and create their own shots. Whereas that's what Jaden Ivey was really good at.
Yeah, and with the half court as well. I mean, you saw when Cade went out in the first quarter for his first break, that's when the team started to pick it up. And that's when they started to play with pace. They went on that huge run there. And I just looked real quick on Tankathon. Atlanta, who's right behind Detroit, has the 27th ranked strength of schedule the rest of the way. They have a lot of easy matchups. Utah, Charlotte, 2 against Brooklyn, 2 against Philly, Portland, Miami. So
they give up a lot of their roster as well. So they kind of like they kind of go either way, to be honest. Like they have kind of a weird hodgepodge playing right now. So I'm not necessarily like, I don't think they're going to necessarily make a run, but like you said, that is something to keep an eye on. Just because the Pistons are in this position, it doesn't mean that they are, that anything is sealed just yet by any means.
Yeah, I'm definitely a person who, when we got the 60, I was like, oh, we're not looking back, baby. But now I'm the pessimist who's looking at it like, oh, man, like there's a possibility, and I'm not going to fully commit to saying we're the 6th seed until it's clinched.
Mm-hmm. And, I think something that like people need to consider as well is even though these guys have played in 82-game seasons the last couple of years, they have kind of been they were kind of in ramp down mode this time these last couple of years. Like they were not playing this consequential basketball at this point in their careers really ever for a lot of these guys. Like this is the first time that they've had something to play for in March and April. So, as far as like them kind of struggling or like them learning to navigate these waters, I don't really find that entirely surprising, right? This is to me, like we've talked about all season of this is where the real evaluation begins because this is when the pressure cooker gets on. And like now that we kind of have like the rose tinted glasses of like the season, because this has still been a great season and a massive success, no matter what happens come playoff time. But like, this is when we can start really looking at, okay, where does this team realistically need to get better? What pieces out there could they actually bring in to make them better in these areas? So I think when you talk about like why a Devin Booker name is brought up so much, it's because especially in those ISO situations, and you talk about, taking chicken, making a chicken salad, he's one of the best tough shot makers in the league. So I definitely understand why people look at someone like him when you talk about some of those struggles and think why he would be, a great fit because they do need, I'm not saying it's a Devin Booker that they're going to go out and get or that they need to get because I think Phoenix still wants to keep him, but it is very much the thing that they do need that other initiator so that when things do break down, they can create chaos out of nothing,
Yeah, you really hit on with like a nail on the head talking about Jaden Ivey, missing him there because he would be the perfect fit at this point in the season. And it's just such a bummer that we're not seeing him get these reps. And I mean, you said it's the first time these guys have consequential basketball this late in the year. Jaden Ivey's missing out on that.
Yep.
And I don't know. And you also talked about what we could add in the offseason. You see the Lauri Markkanen?
Yeah, that was this is why these NBA trade proposals and like some of these like mock trades that are come up with on Bleacher Report. I swear these people have no idea how this stuff works. I mean, don't get me wrong. Lauri Markkanen's a good player, but I saw someone else like pretty much say it of like, give up pretty much everything you have to give up your entire identity. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So like, it's just, yeah, I don't see it. And also again, it's just, you're giving up a ton there. Like there's just not a ton of value being attributed to what the Pistons actually do have because, Isaiah Stewart's don't grow on trees, quite frankly.
No, he was great tonight. I loved Isaiah Stewart. I mean, led the team in steals as well.
Yep, for sure. And I think these games too are like when you talk about like, all right, well, where's the growth for, or where does Jalen Duren, like need to get better? Whenever he faces these premier bigs and these, these elite, like physical defensive bigs, I think is when you kind of see the, where like some of the gaps are. And in my opinion, a lot of that is just, like into the details and, like being able to like not get your head taken out of the game by some of the frustration and some of the officiating and the way that they're playing because that's exactly what their games are designed to do, right? And like as a result, like Duren in 29 minutes only had 5 rebounds in this one, and like you want to talk about a big area of like where like the Pistons got killed tonight, like we can talk, like all you want about like the ways that the Pistons were kind of screwed when it comes to officiating. They gave up 10 offensive rebounds for the Thunder tonight, and they won the rebound battle. And I think especially when you have someone like Duren who has so much skill and upside in those areas, like they need that consistent physicality and production from him in order to beat these top teams. So to me, it's like when you play against the best of the best, that's when it really shows. Okay, this is the benchmark. Where do you got to grow to meet those expectations?
Yeah, and we saw that from him at the beginning of the 8-game streak. I mean, we saw him go against elite bigs and dominate. He went up against Embiid, dominated. And we talked about that
he went up against the corpse of Joel Embiid.
But still, it's a name. I'm happy because the Pistons haven't been able to get over the Embiid rock in a long time.
For sure.
I mean,
for sure.
But we talked about this before with Zubats as well. I mean, Jalen Duren just did not play well against him. He has not really played well against Sabonis. It's these big white dudes. He just has a big trouble with it. That's what I've marked it up to being. He just has an issue with them.
To me, I mean, it's like you even see it against Karl Anthony Towns as well. You see it against, to me, it's like pretty much any of these bigs who can play with physicality, but can also do a lot of different things and stretch the floor in certain aspects. Like even though like Hartenstein isn't going to be shooting the 3 or anything like that, like he can still like space the floor by, like he still plays out in the perimeter with some of his passing and the way that he gets at screens and all of those different things. So, it's tricky, right? So like he's still playing really good basketball, but again, it's like, all right, well, what are some of the examples of like where Jalen Duren needs to grow? Like this is the tape that you would watch, right?
Yeah, and that's what's scary to me about giving him a huge contract is because these are the nights where this is playoff basketball. And if he's not able to go up against the Isaiah Hartensteins, well, how is he going to do against some of the more premier bigs?
Yep, and those are some of the tough conversations that the front office is going to have. And, again, I think that's why like a Knicks series would be really intriguing because he'd go up against a Karl Anthony Towns. He'd go up against, a Mitchell Robinson who's just coming back from injury. So in theory, the Pistons would have a real advantage in the interior in that one, right? That's why people think that the Pistons would have a legitimate chance in actually winning that game. So, they would need their best Jalen Duren come playoff time. So he seems dialed in and he seems focused in those things. But again, it's just how do you keep that focus and maintain that energy and physicality when you feel like you're mentally getting taken out of the game by the Isaiah Hartensteins of the world.
Yeah, and when you have Isaiah Stewart out there and he's playing better, I mean, obviously Isaiah Stewart we want out there at those points. But when Jalen Duren's at his ceiling, that's the guy you want. That's the guy you want to end the games. I don't know. That's just my take on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like Stewart is, to me, it's whoever's been playing the more, like whoever's been having the better game, whoever's the hotter hand, that's who you put out there. But like when we talk about like who is the center that inherently gives them the higher ceiling, it's the one that can jump out of the gym, the one that can, that can give you that monster energy on both sides of the court when he's going strong. And with all due respect to Isaiah Stewart, he's an elite defender. His offensive game isn't what Jalen Duren's is, especially as a lob threat and his pick and roll abilities. So, just inherently, like that's again, it's just someone that they would really have to rely on in order to, like make those pushes. And so, like you said, it's like when those conversations, do come this off season, I think a lot of it's going to be based on what we see over these, next games down the stretch over the next month or so. So I think this strength of schedule, I know a lot of fans look at it and they worry. In my opinion, I think this is great for Trajan Langdon and for his staff because, like I said,
Yes.
this is going to be some pristine evaluation time.
Yeah, and I was gonna make a video on it on my channel as well. I feel like Detroit Pistons fans are really quick to label their players as untouchable, and I think it's really good to know when you're going against these playoff teams at playoff time, and if they can't compete, you might have to pivot and try to get something that can go with Cade because Cades don't grow on trees. I mean,
Yep.
he doesn't have forever in the NBA. We saw him have a minor shin injury, and it scared me because I heard them say, "Oh, he looks like he's holding his shin." I was like, "Oh, well, he's out."
Yep.
But I mean, you just can't be too. You just have to be aggressive, and I
Yeah.
think this is the point where you can't just sit on these players and say, "Well, they could, in theory, fit. In theory, they have the identity." You have to go out there and make things happen.
Well, in one aspect of the new front office is they don't have nearly the same attachment to these players as they do a Troy Weaver and his regime did because they didn't draft these players.
Yep.
These aren't these pieces that like these aren't his guys, like so to speak. Really, the only one that would fit that bill is a Ron Holland. And he's so young. There's still so much, left there on the bone. There's still a lot of years left on his rookie contract. So you don't really have a reason to move off of him unless there's an elite star player out there. And, I think if there's any other player that you would like truly say is like quote unquote untouchable, it would be an Asar Thompson. But again, if someone truly elite is on the market and you have the ability to go and add them, and it takes an Asar Thompson, like if they can bring in a top 10 player in the league, then that changes the conversation, right? But
Yeah.
I it's to me again, it depends on who you're trading for because it's like with all due respect to like a Kevin Durant who is one of my favorite players of all time, there's only so much I would be willing to give up for someone like him because of the fact that he's going to be 36 years old, is going to have all these injuries and ailments that he's going to be coming off of, especially at that age. He pretty much is a guaranteed 20 games off per season. And, again, like you want someone who's not only going to be able to help Cade, but help Cade consistently.
Yeah, and you're looking at what Philly did. You're looking at what the Suns did.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lakers a few years ago, just bringing in a star and trading in the farm doesn't really always help.
Yeah.
And that's more specific with the Lakers. They won a championship. They got rid of a lot of it for Russell Westbrook. So the last thing you want is for the Pistons to trade a package with like Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and a bunch of picks just to find out, oh, this doesn't work. And then you're stuck with a bunch of mediocre assets because, I mean, I don't know. It's just tough because you want to be competitive, but you also don't want to make it so if it doesn't work, you're then set back.
Yeah. It's a very fine line that you have to walk, especially with how much harder it is to build a sustainable team with the way that the salary cap is currently set up. Like it's a really interesting time in the NBA, man. Like teams like the Thunder, you almost have to be pissed with the way that things are set up with the league because it's almost like they're going to be punished for drafting so many good players because it's like you're going to have to pay these guys eventually, right? And like they're all guys who are going to very much deserve some bigger contracts. And like you said, it's like at a certain point you kind of have to make a decision of where you're heading, who you are, who you want to be, and like you have a very pragmatic front office, but I think at the same time that like they have been given reasons this season to go out and push and be aggressive at come off season, at the draft, at the at free agency, via trades, via signings, because they have legitimate reason to build off of this season and what they have.
Yeah, you saw what the Pacers did with Tyrese Halliburton. They got him a Siakam. Obviously, that was mid-season after their ascension. I mean, if the Pistons go into next year with basically the same roster, you pay Malik Beasley, you give extension to Duren, you either let Jaden Ivey go to restricted, and you maybe bring in second-round rookie, you fill in with another vet. I mean, I don't think that's enough because these other teams are getting better, and I don't want to say teams are tanking for Cooper, but we've seen it before with other years. And there's going to be
I'll
teams
say
that
it. I'll absolutely say it, Leggy. Teams are absolutely playing capture the flag with some of the lineups that they're throwing out there.
And it's so tough because yes, the Pistons are doing good, but let's say this was last year's draft class. What other team below the Pistons might have not made decisions that they did to then project them into the top 6? I mean, that's something in the back of my head, and I don't want to discredit what Detroit's doing at all. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you go in with the same team next year, I think you're a little bit set up for a little bit of failure.
Yeah, I think if there's any team that you look at as kind of a good case point of sitting on their hands a little too long, I look at the team like the Sacramento Kings, who a couple years ago, they were the 2nd seed in the Western Conference. People are feeling great about their future. And, they're like, oh, De'Aaron Fox, DeMontis Sabonis, Mike Brown. We got, something's cooking in Sacramento. And not even 3 years later, like it's all gone. They've essentially become Bulls West. They have Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan doing a reuniting tour out in Sacramento. And, don't get me wrong, like they could potentially make the play in maybe, but at the same time, like they're not that good. And they were in the conversations for Pascal Siakam. They were in the conversations for OG Anunoby. They were in the conversations for Mikal Bridges, but for whatever reason, they were never the team that was pulling the trigger and getting these deals done. And by the way, I find it awfully poetic that of all players to pretty much end this era for the Sacramento Kings, it was Jaden Ivey who did not want to work out for them pre-draft.
Yeah. Yeah. There were fans that were cheering when Jaden Ivey or what Keegan Murray went right before. People were cheering for that.
Yep, I remember. And then there was the clip of Troy Weaver that was circulating online when he was like, "Yeah, I mean, okay, if you're really gonna let us take Jaden Ivey, we'll take Jaden Ivey."
Yeah, remember when Sacramento drafted Marvin Bagley and there was a fan that was just in his house just cheering. He's like, "I didn't want Luka. Thank God we got Marvin Bagley."
Oh, that poor fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of teams, if they went 1 or 2, would have probably taken one of the bigs. But I mean, what year is it? What year are we in? Oh man.
Yeah, I remember the conversations. Like everyone's like, obviously DeAndre Ayton's first, and now everyone looks back and goes, "Oh no."
Yeah, they're like, obviously it should have been Luka. Well, it's like, what was the thought process then? I wish I could go back and kind of read into some of those narratives and talk to people who were strong on that point.
So from what I remember from that time, there was still a major stigma on drafting European players that high after the Darko Milicic draft, especially, like people knew that he had success in the 2nd best league in the world. People knew that he won MVP and all of those things, but people questioned, just because he's not the most athletic player in the world, how much of that would actually transfer over to the NBA game. And so I think, like if he played at Duke, I think he would have gone number 1. Let me put it that way. Like if he wasn't from Slovenia and instead he was from like Sacramento, or like San Antonio, like he probably would have gone number 1.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion as to why that happened at the time. I think now, obviously, we've seen, just I think with social media, I think with just how much more people have put into covering overseas prospects, how much more we see overseas prospects come out. Like I think the word is out on some of these prospects more, so to speak. So I think some of that has just been how weird the scouting was of those overseas teams, because it almost felt like even more of a gamble than some of these guys that you're drafting domestically. Because here domestically, you see them so much, and you know what the competition is.
Yeah, and you had Phoenix number 1. DeAndre Ayton played for
Arizona. Yep. Yep. Some of those pressures are built in. And even though like this is a league that's still like a 3-point shooting league, like there's a reason why like bigs are awfully enticing, man. Cause when you get a special big, they can certainly move a needle in a very different way than even some special guards can. Like that's why Victor Wembanyama is so touted, is because like he does all these things, and oh yeah, he's 7'4".
Yeah. Yeah, like him, Mobley, Chet Holmgren are the kind of those three that. But it's funny because then with Chet and Mobley, you have elite guards around you.
Yep.
So it's a little bit different there compared to Wemby, who I guess now has Fox, but we've seen the success that come from the Thunder and Cleveland. And without their main pieces, I don't know what Chet and Mobley really are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like people have talked about like whether or not like, like the Thunder in like Orlando, like if they would still make the same picks that they made, or if, if how fan base should feel. I think Orlando and Oklahoma City are both thrilled with who they have. I don't know if Paulo works as well in Oklahoma City when he doesn't have the ball in his hands as much. Whereas like a Chet he can do whatever you need him to do. And Chet, like as great of a player as he is, he's probably not your number one scorer franchise guy. Like he's a great leader, but I don't think you're having nearly as much success. Like you needed someone kind of like similar to like with the Pistons, where like with Pistons in Cleveland with Cade and Evan Mobley. Like I think both teams are thrilled there as well, because again, very similar conversation. Cleveland has a lot of guards. He'd be very redundant in Cleveland. Like Evan Mobley, he was a finishing piece what Cleveland is building. So, I think there's something to be said about like teams could be happy with who they got. I think both teams can feel like they won the draft in their own respects.
Yeah, and I mean Mobley was a guy who a lot of people had at number one as well. I mean, there were reports that Weaver did, and a lot of people said, "Oh, that's smokescreen," but he had Wiseman number one on his board, and was that 2020, the year before? So
no, I mean, the reports that he did not make up his mind until the morning of are true.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. Like he was going like he was going back and forth, and I think obviously he made the right call, and I think Pistons fans would agree with that, and I think Cleveland is thrilled with where they're at. Houston, I think they're in an interesting spot, because it's like, don't get me wrong, Jalen Green, very talented player. When he's in his hot streaks, he could be as much of a microwave player as anybody, but if you put them in a lie detector test, I don't think they could pass saying, "Oh yeah, we'd definitely take Jalen Green all over again."
Yeah, you put Scotty Barnes or even honestly Jalen Suggs a little bit in that situation. I think that's a little bit upgraded with Şengün.
Or even put Evan Mobley with Amen Thompson. Let those guys run out, play defense, get in the pick and roll.
Yep, Franz Wagner.
Oh, yeah.
Jumped up there, and that would have been
in a redraft. Franz is definitely not getting out of the top 4.
No, I don't think he's out of the top 3.
No, it's very, very hard pressed to think he's getting out of the top 3 in a redraft. It's those are always super fun to kind of look back at, and I kind of wonder, especially now that like March Madness is coming back up. Like we're going to be watching a lot of college basketball over the next few weeks. Like I love college hoops. I love March Madness, but I don't tune in really until this time very much in college, if I'm being honest, because as much as I love the college game, I view everything from the lens of the NBA. I watch college in the sense of, all right, who are the guys that could be playing in the league? Who are guys that, and what would be good fits for them, And so it's going to be interesting because Detroit is more than likely not going to have a first round pick. So do they trade into this draft? Do they, do they trade future first round picks to go get another player? Because I think Trajan, I think he very much values that draft capital. And, I think if you're looking at what model Detroit's kind of looking at to rebuild, I think they kind of look at an OKC of how much their talent is in house. It'd be interesting if Trajan does decide hey, is there someone I like in the top 10, top 15?
Yeah, you'd have to, I don't know what kind of capital you'd have to give, but that would be an interesting move because with OKC, when they started acquiring those picks, you saw they had a couple years of being in the absolute dumps.
Oh, for sure. And a lot of their talent is from how bad they were, the picks that they got. But they did get Jalen Williams from the Clippers.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that a little bit too. That was wild to look at. You sent the picture. Oh, man, that's crazy. But with the Pistons, it'd be tough for me to see them kind of building that way just because you already have so many young guys. And I feel like the moment you added veterans like a Tobias Harris, Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., who everyone wrote off, by the way, we've talked about that before. it'd be hard to just keep adding young players because then you'd have to get an older guy out of the rotation, someone
For
who's
sure.
been seasoned, been through March. So, I mean, if you get a guy and maybe even if he turns out to be rookie of the year, that's a different conversation. But where is he going to break in? I don't know. That's a tough one for me.
Yeah, more than likely, I think to your point, they're going to be going after, older players. I think they're probably going to want to bring in someone more established to play, like alongside this group. It's just going to be, like a matter of who. It's going to be, fascinating because I think we're going to see like especially just where things are in the league and just in general. I think you're just going to continue to see every summer and every deadline the league seismically change in some fashion, right? Like I think, like just to think off the top of my head, like I saw reports that the 76ers could look to trade Paul George. I saw reports that if things don't go well in Milwaukee, Giannis might want out. We all know, yeah, like Trae Young is probably going to be gone from Atlanta, like not to say that like these are going to be players that the Pistons are in the market for. I think if you could get Paul George on the low, that might be interesting, just in the fact of, do you really think he's truly washed, or was it just the circumstance of everything last season, right? So if they could buy him on the low and he turns out to still be awesome, I think that's something to at least entertain, but at the same time, probably not.
Yeah, he was one of my dream targets in 2K. In the past
Oh,
few years, getting
absolutely.
him, it's like, oh, get him, he'll turn us into a contender. And
Like-
another thing is, you mentioned those 3 teams, and all those teams are in the East, and so that only might seismically change the landscape of the NBA again. Sending
Right.
Giannis, Trae Young, Paul George was the other name out west.
Yeah.
And then you have teams rebuilding. I mean, then that props up some of those younger teams in the East, or it makes it so there's some big stars in the West that say, oh, let's go team up out East. There's not much competition.
Well,
so
I saw reports. I saw reports as well that several teams are going to be talking to New Orleans about Zion this offseason. So there's teams out west as well. They're going to be having to make some real changes and have some real difficult conversations. I mean, not to keep beating this horse, but when Luka Doncic can be traded, anything's on the table.
Yeah. Zion with Cade.
Oh, I mean, if there's anyone that would know if that risk is worth taking or not, it's Trajan. Just saying. Yep. So we said the same thing about Brandon Ingram. Imagine, I mean, it says a lot that the Pistons weren't even in conversations for Brandon Ingram. So it'll be interesting to see if Detroit's even like mentioned at all in that market. I'm going to be fascinated to be hearing the reporting on that for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you add Zion and that drastically changes the makeup of your team because you have a Jalen Duren and a Sar Thompson who can't really shoot at this point.
Right.
I mean, we saw Herb Jones develop a 3-pointer, and when he came into the league, he didn't have one at all. You saw him work with Vincent. He was able to become an elite 3-point threat. That's how he was able to fit. I mean, you put Zion in there in a lot of the pick and rolls with Cade. What do you do with Duren?
Yep.
What do you do with Asar if a lot of your ball movement is between those 2 players?
Yeah.
So that changes a lot. And maybe if you then get Zion, then you maybe move one of those in a deal and you move another one to do something else to kind of fill it out. But I don't know. I feel like Zion would be a major shift. And that's one that is at least really intriguing to me.
For sure. And like you said, I just think, ultimately the Pistons, just whatever happens towards the end of the season, they can't be stagnant because the teams throughout the East are only going to continue to, improve. Orlando is not going to be this bad next season. They are not, like, with the injury bugs, like they're probably going to make changes too. Like they're a very competitive young team.
Yeah, they know what they do well, and it's obvious what hasn't worked well. The half-court offense and the 3-point shooting. They brought in KCP, and they're going to look at that and say, wow, that wasn't enough. Now we need to go overboard. And they might lose a little bit of their other identity, which is their defense. But, I mean, when you're one of the best damn teams in the NBA defense, you can afford that, especially in a league that revolves around offense.
Well, and when you have a player like Apollo Banchero who's so special as an offensive player, like I'm okay with them leaning into that a little bit because especially when you have a Franz Wagner, like you kind of already have the potential to score a lot of points. So supplement that team with with guys who can do things on both sides of the floor, like some capable 2-way guys, and make it so that you're at least average defensively, but can really light it up, especially on the scoreboard. So Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be fascinated to see what conversations are, Detroit's in, this off season. But, I think big picture, I think when you're talking about like, what are the teams that are feeling the best about their future going forward in the East, I think the Pistons are definitely in the top 3, top 4 in
Oh,
that conversation. I would say the only teams that are really up there in that sense are like Cleveland can have this group for a good while. Indiana can still play with this group for a long time as well. I think Boston obviously is in that conversation. The one thing that's tricky with them is they're up for sale, so a lot of their future is going to very much depend on who buys the Boston Celtics and what they're going to want to do differently with their direction. But otherwise, I mean, you have Tatum and Jaylen Brown. As long as you have those guys, you're competing, right?
yeah.
So I think the Pistons are right up there.
I would say another team that is a little bit sneaky there that I don't think a lot of people would say is Charlotte. You have a lot of building block players there.
Yeah.
A lot of that revolves around Brandon Miller's injury history. We've seen a lot of things pop up. So, and obviously, if he's not on the court, they don't sniff this conversation. But
Right.
when he is, man, he looks great.
Yeah. I think they're gonna have some hard conversations this offseason as well, though. Especially, like all due respect to I think they're gonna have to figure out does LaMelo Ball want to be here long term? Can we win with LaMelo Ball as our star player in the long term? Because I mean, we're in year 5 now, and like they had some competitive they had some seasons where they were in the play in, but then they got their crapper absolutely kicked in by Indiana both of those games. And as exciting of a player as LaMelo is, as dynamic of a player as LaMelo is, I don't think anyone would say to the contrary. But he's only signed there through 28, 29. That's still like a few more years. But I mean, you're gonna have to have some real conversations, because this window with him's not very much longer, and he could maybe come to the organization and say, hey, I want to do something different.
Yeah, and with his injury history, and it's funny, I talked about Brandon Miller, and a lot of it revolves around his injury history. I didn't even mention LaMelo, who doesn't play a lot. I mean, there's a scenario where the Hornets go to him and say, it's not working out, because they changed their management. Up and coming guy from, I think it was Brooklyn. Then you have Charles Lee,
Who's
great
a good coach.
young coach. I mean, they're trying to change the culture there.
Yeah.
And if you have guys who don't play, I mean, they might try to move on from that. So I could easily see them saying, mutually, this isn't working. Let's go try to make something happen for both of us instead of it being a shit show.
Yeah. One team that I think does deserve some credit, by the way, for some of the moves that they made of late are the Washington Wizards. Like, listen.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, I don't think I'm not saying here by any stretch of the imagination this is a good basketball team, because they are absolutely not. They are a pretty bad basketball team. A lot of the times when they lose by a pretty heavy margin. However, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton bring some real adults that know how to compete and know what it takes to play at a high level in order to actually win night in, night out. And ever since they've been added to the lineup, they look like a much more competent team. That first game against Washington, the Wizards got absolutely smoked. But that second game the Pistons played the Wizards, Chris Middleton was playing really well, from the floor, and starting to look more like his old self. So, I think when you talk about like interesting teams to monitor, at least over the next few years, like the Wizards are no longer utterly awful, and that's not nothing.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of taking the Detroit approach, which the Rockets took the year before. You get veterans for these young guys. You're not trying to fit circles into square holes. I mean, you're trying to make it so you have guys who can carry that load when the players and the young guys in your roster can't do it. And I mean, I love Alex Sarr, but he kind of reminds me of that Evan Mobley piece where, I mean, he's not really going to be the offensive engine for you, at least at this point. I mean, he's really good on defense. We saw that.
Yeah.
So I think hopefully they continue to keep adding veterans to that and don't just like try to trade them for picks and then have a whole roster of young guys again, because that just doesn't work. We've seen that for so many young teams. And that's what ruins players' careers. Like, find the roles your guys are good at, and then when you can draft, and this year they'll have the opportunity. Are they the worst record right now?
The Wizards?
Yeah.
Most definitely. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
then they have a chance at flag. They have a chance at a top 3. I mean, at least
Yep.
top 5. They have a chance to get the guy that can take that offensive load for you. So you don't have to
Yeah.
worry about, oh, well, maybe we have to get a Chris Middleton.
Yeah. Like if they land flag, I no longer think it would be an utter disaster. Like I think if he was able to play alongside of Chris Middleton, I think that would do wonders for him.
Yes.
So, by the way, it was really interesting because I was there for the game on Tuesday. I didn't even think about this whether or not this was going to be a reality, but right as I walked out of the Wizards press conference room and go to turn to the court, who do I see in the corner of my eye other than Troy Weaver, former Pistons general manager, standing right there? And obviously there was the whole thing with him and Steve, like from Stephen A. about him the other week. I will say, like he was well received by people in the building. Like him and Cade had a moment where they hugged and,
Yep, I
and,
saw
and
that,
caught
yep.
up. He had a moment. I saw him and Greg Kelser have a moment, and George Blaha as well. Like he's someone that was well liked within the building. But it was really interesting. I'll just say that much. It was probably, especially on that first night, I'm sure it was pretty hard for him to watch a lot of the pieces that he put together really start to take that jump and go, man, if only this was last year, I would still be here.
Yeah, he can easily look back and say, you know what? Maybe we should have gotten some veterans. And that just reminds me of that game where last year against Miami, where Cade takes that early 3, Bam runs down, hits that game winning, like almost half court shot. And you remember that one? It was on like 04 Remembrance night.
Oh, yeah.
And they were talking about how, I mean, the players up in the booth were saying, like, get these guys some mentors. Like, you can't just have a roster of just young kids.
Yeah.
And Weaver with Washington went into the season, and you know what they did? And obviously he's not the main decision maker. They go with all the young kids. And then the halfway through the season goes, you get the trade deadline. They bring in the vets, and what do you know? They're a better team. So if Troy Weaver, he's pretty old now. He's probably not going to get another opportunity after what happened in Detroit. But if he does, we know he's not going to make that mistake again.
He's certainly someone who I think for his scouting eye is always going to be well respected and well regarded. And I think he will always have a role in a front office in some capacity somewhere. I just question whether or not the stigma of the 28 game losing streak is something that he could ever shake when it comes to getting hired for like a front office role. Like imagine if you're a Dallas Mavericks fan and you fire Nico Harrison and you find out, oh, they just hired the guy who lost 28 games in a row in Detroit. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Like that would probably be a very tough pill to swallow. Right. So I don't think that's happening, but
hey, what do you know? Luka got traded, so that could happen.
Exactly. Did you see, by the way, that 92% of the 76ers salary is currently injured or not active?
I saw that. That's the most.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an insane number.
Yeah.
And
the Mavericks are at like 70 something percent. So they're right up there too. But like, man, like people like Dallas is like, man, could it is it really that like, has it ever been this bad? It's like Billy's over there like, oh, we're just hanging out for dear life.
They're an injury or two away from being in the same boat where they might have to forfeit games. I don't know the exact number, but you're talking about how much of their salary is out right now. I mean, that has to be pretty dang close to what Dallas has.
And it's something that we haven't seen since 1965. I believe you said earlier in the podcast. This is something that we haven't really had like an understanding of what that would look like. But I can only imagine what a nightmare a forfeit would be, not only just from an embarrassment standpoint, a PR standpoint, but just imagine the logistics of, all right, well, then I imagine you have to refund all the fans. Then, that's money that one of the sides loses out on. Like what happens with the employees? Do they still get paid? Like it is a whole whole stretch of nightmares that you are introducing with that type of scenario. So, I think if there's anything I would close off with, I think it's like, with all due respect to the Lakers, as much fun as this Luka and LeBron pairing has been, and there's a lot of buzz and love about them coming out of the All-Star break. They're playing awesome. I don't want to hear anything about them being the favorites in the West anymore, especially with the injury stuff. But also, it's like, man, all due respect to all these other teams, it's the Thunder's world in the West, and they're all just living in it.
Yeah. I want to see them go against the Celtics real bad.
Yep.
Because we're talking about how dominant the Thunder have been this year, like historically. The Celtics were that last year. So you're talking about two potential all-time teams.
And you're like, talk about like two contrasting styles. Like you have the Celtics who absolutely live and die by the three. They average like when the Thunder and Celtics matched up earlier in the week, like the Celtics shot the most 3-pointers in a half in the history of the game.
And that's over the Rockets with the Harden team. That's
and,
crazy to me.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Oklahoma City loves getting to the interior, loves playing inside the paint. And Boston was shooting all those threes, and they were down by double digits at points in the second half, which is just utterly crazy. Just shows you how good they are. But again, it's like, yeah, I don't think that series is a guarantee. Like either way, like I think like that is a very equal matchup. And even then, there's not necessarily a guarantee that's the finals either, because Cleveland OKC would be a pretty dang good matchup too.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Like that would be the most, either one of those two scenarios with Boston or Cleveland. You're talking about the best finals since, I mean, what year?
I mean, really since the Cleveland Golden State, when Cleveland came back from the 3-1 lead. So like 2016.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list and that's about right. The most star-studded players.
Yeah, like a lot of them, it was like, all right, well, Kevin Durant's on the Warriors, so they're going to win. Or it was, oh, well, Kevin Durant's injured, so the Raptors are going to win. Or, it was just
it's
like
Jimmy Butler in there by himself.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Heat, it's like, how do they even get here? Like, what even is this series?
Yeah. Bucks Suns, I can say that was probably a high
That was a good matchup.
But yeah, I'm looking at the list right now, man, and that's Golden State, Boston.
Yeah,
it's another one, but Boston was also young. I guess OKC would be Boston. Okay, I guess if it was Cleveland, OKC, that'd probably be my favorite because it's two just teams that haven't been there. And so there's not like one team's young, so they're expected to lose here. That's like, you don't have that. And that's rare to have. I feel like that's very rare to have one team that's just never been there.
Yep.
You also have, now you'd have two teams.
Well, and whenever you lose the finals, you can always generally say to yourself as like a way to like you can always kind of give yourself the pick me up of, well, we can be back. Like we have like we're good enough to get here. We could be good enough to get back, like we're going to be okay, especially if you're one of these younger teams. But like, imagine going back, imagine going back in time with a time machine and going to the Suns and Mavericks respective fan bases after they lost their finals and telling them where they're at now and what has happened. They would all laugh at you. They would not believe you even a little bit.
Or the 11-12 OKC Thunder. The Magic in 09.
Well, and I think that's going to be the interesting thing with this Thunder team when you talk about whether or not they can get it done, like all the pressure that's kind of on them. Like the pressure is not really on these players and on this coaching staff as much as it's on Sam Presti in this front office, because it's like you are going to have now coming up on 4 MVP caliber players on your roster in the last 20 years. 3 of them were on the same team, and you do not yet have a title to show for it.
Yep. And you know who's coming? Wemby. The Luka Lakers. Nothing is there's not a guarantee you'll be back. I mean, I'm sure the Pistons fans, they won in 04. Pretty sure they were like, okay, we're going to win one more. We're going to at least make one more finals. They did. They lost.
Yeah.
Oh, we're in the conference finals for like 3 more years after the loss?
Yeah.
We'll win one. No, nothing's guaranteed, man.
And I have a good feeling that if not on the Thunder, Giannis is going to be somewhere out west next year.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about where he could be next year. Because that is a scary thought. Good for the Central Division, though. Good for us.
For sure. In my opinion, I think the best landing spot for Giannis would be Houston.
Yeah, they already have a lot of the pieces that would
really
fit.
He would also bring a lot of clarity to their hierarchy. He would be the unquestioned number 1 guy. He would be able to play alongside some other really good players. I think the one thing you'd have to figure out is what you do with Şengün, because he doesn't really
Yeah.
like shooting threes. He's not really a great spacer. He's not really like a Brook Lopez. So he would either have to become a Brook Lopez, or you would have to essentially include him in the deal in return and go get another big, because he would probably not be an ideal guy to play alongside of Giannis. But I mean, if there's anyone you move a Şengün for, with all due respect to Şengün and Rocket stance, it's Giannis.
Yeah. I'm with you there.
Yep. Well, someone I wouldn't trade is Leggy, because he is my guy. Thank you, dude. Thank you so much, seriously, for coming on. Always enjoy having you on the podcast. Gonna have to have you on real soon. Definitely at when the playoffs go on, but at least hopefully at least one or two more times before the playoffs. So appreciate you, man. And thank you for listening and joining us here on the pod. If you like what we do here on From Half Court, be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.